On a quiet Wednesday evening, my wife glanced up from her phone and casually remarked that I was replaceable. There was no anger in her voice, no argument leading up to it, just a careless sentence, spoken as if I were nothing more than an outdated appliance waiting to be replaced. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was intentional, carefully chosen to hurt. I stayed silent, swallowed the pain, and simply nodded as though her words hadn't cracked the very foundation of the life we'd built together. 10 years of marriage, a decade of loyalty, sacrifice, compromise, and doing everything I could to make sure she felt loved and secure. When we first met, she was struggling to find her footing. I stood beside her through it all. I paid off her debts, supported her ambitions, encouraged every dream she had, and gave her the stability she'd never known. Yet somehow, in the end, I had become replaceable. That night, while she slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm she'd created, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. She didn't deserve either. Instead, I'd do the one thing she never expected. I'd walk away and make sure she felt every step of my departure. For the next several weeks, I played the role of the devoted husband. I smiled, asked about her day, cooked her favorite meals, and acted as though we were still living in the happiest years of our marriage. Behind the scenes, however, I was quietly untangling every part of our shared life. The house in the Brookhaven neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, belonged to me. I'd purchased it long before we married. Both vehicles were titled solely in my name. Nearly every dollar in our joint accounts had come from my income. The credit cards attached to my credit could be canceled with a single phone call. I hired a lawyer, reviewed every document twice, and made sure every legal detail was in order. There would be no surprises, at least not for me. The moment finally arrived on a Saturday morning. She wandered into the kitchen with her usual confidence, completely unaware that I had spent the previous week quietly cutting every financial tie between us. "Any plans today?" I asked as I poured her a cup of coffee. "Maybe meeting some friends," she answered casually. Then, wearing that familiar smirk, she added, "You'll be fine, won't you? You're lucky I've stayed this long." That was the final wound. Without saying another word, I slid a thick envelope across the marble kitchen island. She looked at it with mild curiosity before opening it. Inside were copies of bank statements showing our joint accounts had been legally transferred into my personal account. Her credit cards had been canceled. The SUV she drove had been retitled solely in my name. And resting beneath those papers was a formal separation agreement already prepared for her signature. "What is this?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "It's exactly what you wanted," I replied calmly. "Freedom. The opportunity to find someone better to replace me." Her hands began to shake as she turned each page. The truth crashed over her like icy water. She was intelligent enough to understand the legal paperwork. She immediately realized the safety net she'd always assumed would be there had disappeared. "You're serious?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You told me I was replaceable," I answered, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "Now you finally have the chance to prove it." For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. The weight of her own words had finally caught up with her. She tried to recover. "I didn't mean it that way." I calmly shook my head. "You've said it in different ways for years." "You absolutely meant it." "And that's all that matters." She desperately searched for control. "You're ending our marriage over one comment?" "Not one comment," I replied. "Years of disrespect, years of being dismissed, years of being made to feel like I didn't matter. Our conversation never became loud. No shouting, no insults, only painful honesty filling the room. The silence inside that kitchen weighed heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Within a week, she was gone. Without the house, without access to the finances, without the comfortable lifestyle she'd grown so accustomed to enjoying. The friends who had always surrounded her while the money flowed quickly disappeared once the luxury disappeared as well. Reality arrived faster than she ever expected. At first, her text messages were filled with pride. "You'll regret this." Later, they became softer. "Can we please talk?" Eventually, they turned into long paragraphs filled with apologies, excuses, explanations, claims that stress had changed her, and even accusations that I had never appreciated everything she'd done. I never answered. Every single message only reminded me why I had chosen to leave. Several months later, I saw her sitting alone at a small cafe in Midtown. She looked different, smaller somehow, less confident. When she noticed me, she hesitantly waved me over. The arrogance that had once defined her was gone. In its place stood someone carrying the heavy weight of regret. "I've been wanting to talk," she said quietly. "I was wrong. I honestly believed you'd never leave. I thought you needed me more than I needed you." I looked at her calmly. "That was your biggest mistake. You believed love came with a guarantee. You believed I'd stay no matter how poorly you treated me." She slowly wrapped both hands around her coffee mug before asking in a trembling voice, "Can we still fix this?" At that moment, I finally understood the true strength of walking away. "No," I answered simply. "Some things break beyond repair." "You made sure of that?" She lowered her head and quietly nodded, doing everything she could to hold herself together. As I stood to leave, I paused for one final moment. "You know," I said softly, "everyone is replaceable. You're the one who taught me that. I just eventually realized it applies to you as well." Then I walked out of the cafe. There was no anger left inside me, no bitterness, no resentment, only peace. The woman who once believed I was expendable had finally discovered what it truly felt like to be the one left behind. And this time, there was no going back.